Hello, this is Darren from Danger by Degrees. So here's a quick recap. The city of Beirut has been hit with a massive, unbelievable explosion. It measured 3.3 on the Richter scale as testified by the U.S. Geological Survey. It was measured to be 10% of the strength of Hiroshima, the atomic bomb that was dropped on the city in Japan. The only man-made explosions similar to this were the Halifax explosion in 1917, the Texas City blast of 1947, and the Ripple Rock explosion of 1958 on Vancouver Island. All of these were man-made explosions that basically either involved ammonium nitrate, such as the Beirut blast, or were containing munitions, such as the Halifax explosion. The aftermath has left over 170 plus confirmed dead. 52 people are still missing as of today, and sad to say, many of those who are missing probably were vaporized. In addition to this, 6,000 people were injured and 300,000 people were made homeless. This video today is focusing on the recovery, the attempt, if you will, to get life back to normal. People are now past the disaster and they're trying to get back on their feet. In disasters on this channel, we are always taking different aspects of the study of emergencies. So in this case, we're talking about the recovery. And another aspect of disasters is the effect on history, and on the culture, and on the things people cling to, their heritage. In this disaster, the Ministry of Culture states at least 45 buildings of a historical degree are at risk of collapse, and 41 more are at risk of partial collapse. So that could be, say, the front portion of the building, or the front facade could come off, or a back part of the building could be facing collapse. The structure itself, for the most part, will stay intact, but a part of the building is at risk of collapse. Some buildings have fallen down. Some structures have lost their important architectural elements, such as gables, such as stained glass, such as unique frescoes, such as important art pieces. The problems defined in this community are psychological, for instance. The buildings here serve as anchors for great memories. This is where people would hang out. This is where people would find their first love, where they dated, this is where people proposed to their loved ones, where they gathered for evening drinks, or watching ships in the harbor. These are also the places that would make one know that it's their home, their center, their everything, their life, where they get off from work, where they go to eat, where they go to meet up with friends. The problem is one of values. People see their history in the buildings. They see their life in the shops where they go, where the streetscapes, and where the people gather. They see their personal stories in the comings and goings of people in the shops. The problem is one of values. People see their history in the buildings. They see their personal stories in the comings and goings of people in the shops and out on the streets. Values such as love, companionship, and even their national pride. The buildings and the streetscapes pre-disaster were the signs that they were alive and people felt something more important than themselves. This was their Lebanon. This was their Beirut. The problems explained can be summed up as these buildings represent their life going on as a normal way of being. The problems explained can be summed up as these buildings represent their life, their normal, their everyday status. Their life goes on as normal without having to worry about jobs, their homes, or their shelter. They go to eat, they go to sleep, it's just their regular life, their lifestyle. And now that these buildings have been damaged and these streetscapes have been impacted, the problem becomes one of a lifestyle. It becomes the lack of normal, everyday action. Everything that they consider that is their life has now been impacted. So when you think about that, it's very hard to sum up what a lifestyle is until you've had it impacted. So it's an ethereal kind of psychological blow that they're now stuck, unable to go out to their favorite cafe. They're no longer able to go walking out by the port without seeing all this damage. So the buildings represent the history values, the values that can be seen in the people who built them, the history of the cultures that founded them, the history of the struggle in the different classes of people that came together to build them and make them livable. The values can be seen in the artwork, the gables, the architect, the arches that are inside the homes, the styles that one neighbor made in their home, and how they compare to how a neighbor across the street made their home. in the neighbor and how they all compare to each other. And this is what makes this a community. The issues from a larger scale are in the change in the neighborhoods that will come from this. Home ownership, the change in building styles, the increases, for instance, in building height, population density, gentrification, physical changes to the streetscapes, the changes to the traffic patterns, and even in future demand on infrastructure, because more people means you'll need more water. More people means there will be more sewage. More people means that you have to have higher sources of, say, electrical power going through. Right now, property developers are circling like vultures trying to push out those who have lived there now. Some of the attempts are with persuasion, so offering more money, helping find new homes, etc. Others, well, they don't really care about the people that live there. They don't care about the value of the history. They just want them gone. They want to build. And they're using rather not so ethical means to do it. Look at the homes themselves. Look at the architecture. Some of the issues to think about include, well, what about the frescoes? What about the unique art styles? What about the unique plaster work? What about the unique things such as archways and exterior facades of the buildings? Some of these were made by processes that people just don't use anymore. There's no artisans that know how to make the plaster swirls that you might find in a very unique, say, Italian-styled 19th century building, or an Armenian-style cross fresco that was probably only made by immigrants who only practiced one style of work, and now they stopped probably making them back in the 1900s or the early 20th century. And now, of course, now that these structures have been damaged and now that these methods of creation are gone, the best that anybody can expect is that you're likely going to see some reasonable facsimile. Some of these architectural features were not very well documented to begin with. So now that they've been destroyed, no one knows how to recreate them. The artisans that could be used to make these are no longer able to do this. No one kept up these traditions, these creative traditions, and so you effectively are having things that were done a certain way back in the 16, 17, 1800s are no longer done today. So how are these going to be repaired? Where there is documentation, some of these types of structures can be recreated. Some of these structures will be able to be repaired, but others you'll have to create something that is similar. So there won't actually be that same unique heritage. How is this going to go forward? Well, right now, the Ministry of Culture has gotten together with UNESCO and other NGOs, and people have gotten on the ground. They're organizing, and they're setting up each individual area into kind of a sector, and each NGO and each section from UNESCO and other related international groups are coming together, and they are using the documentation that has been created beforehand and are working together to first survey, map, and get a general idea of just how bad the damage is. They're defining what has been impacted. They're assessing the immediate needs of action, so they're drawing up action plans to save what they can. Those that are in most need of help right now will get dealt with first, and those that can be dealt with later. There needs to be, and this right now, there's no, as far as I'm aware, any kind of legal protection or any kind of mechanisms that provide any legal protection to preserve historical buildings. So there needs to be new laws probably brought in, or some means brought in by the government to lean on developers to back off and at least try to protect these buildings, or provide another means, say, try to create a system in place where if there is going to be development in these areas that have been impacted, at least try to preserve the facades or the exteriors of the buildings if possible, or try to recycle and save some of the interior arches and gableways and, say, the ceramic works and restore them somewhere else so that at least something can be saved. And another thing that could be happening is to create localized rules in place so that the new structures that are built are at least built in a similar style to the historical and the heritage buildings that can be saved, so that at least areas do not look like a mishmash of various and different, shall we say, non-complementary architectural styles. So that you could end up creating a situation where you'll have a 16th century building or an 18th century French colonial building, but it doesn't really look like a part with all these new 20th century type or 21st century type of buildings that are built around it. Going forward, there needs to be, at the very, very least, a coming together of the groups and those that are concerned who want to protect and want to preserve these buildings to get them the provision of funds to help them rebuild, help with architects and those who are skilled craftsmen to help replace and restore what has been lost, to document what has existing beforehand to help restore to at least some kind of reasonable facsimile so that at least the historical nature and the cultural elements can be at least restored. Another thing that needs to happen is that for those who are willing to sell, try to at least preserve the buildings or preserve the properties as best as possible by buying these properties, restoring them to, say, a pre or a new type of historical, if you will, concept, so that that means that wherever possible, the pre-existing, say, stained glass windows were kept, but say the needed facade was replaced, but at least as many of the pre-existing historical features were preserved. That's another thing. The other thing is that there has to be brought in legal protections for the existing properties to try to create a system in which heritage buildings are protected. And that means leaning on developers to get them to back off and not to act in ways that are both ethically and criminally negligent that will help basically hasten the demise of these buildings because there's no care given to them. This event could also be a source to rejuvenize and revitalize certain areas. If you look at a lot of major cities that have historical networks or historical downtowns or historical neighborhoods, this could be an opportune time to mix both the heavy, say, density residential areas that surround these areas, but also provide the means by which to promote a tourism or to promote cultural tourism that reflects and protects these structures, while at the same time giving a means to promote development in these areas. This is again is another potential option that can be brought out now. Because with this disaster, a lot of people are now heavily impacted, and the future is going to be very questionable. But again, there is opportunity in disasters to help develop, and this is one element where historical avenues can be used to generate tourism. This is Darren. If you're watching this, you're with Danger by Degrees. Join me in another episode of all things emergency, disaster, and crisis as we continue to reflect and explore all things crisis. Please subscribe, share, and comment. Help me help this channel grow for the future.